Welcome to my channel. Sometimes love doesn't arrive like thunder. Sometimes it settles in quietly, like the creak of an old floorboard, or the way two teacups sit just a little too close together. What happens when loneliness lingers too long? When the spaces between grief and desire start to blur? Tonight, we begin a story not about betrayal, but about longing, about silence, about a house where nothing was supposed to happen, and yet everything did. This is the house at Wisteria Lane, a tale of soft glances, quiet nights, and the storm no one speaks of. So dim the lights, let the stillness settle, and listen closely, because in some houses, it's not the ghosts that haunt you. It's the memories you almost lived. Let's begin. The first night I stayed at my father-in-law's house, the porch light outside had just flickered off, and a strange feeling stirred inside me, part comfort, part disquiet. My husband, Daniel, had taken an overseas assignment just days after our wedding. He was supposed to be gone for only 6 months, but then the pandemic hit. Flights were suspended indefinitely. I stayed behind in the city, alone, for 2 months. Our tiny apartment quickly turned into a cold, lonely shell. My own parents were in another state, my mother ill, my father too frail to travel. That summer, rolling blackouts swept the city. The plumbing in my building was under repair. One night, I received a call from Daniel's father. "Tom, why don't you come stay here for a while? No use being alone in that apartment. This place has been empty since Mary passed. It's too quiet around here." I hesitated. I wasn't particularly close to Tom, but in truth, I had no one else nearby, and I was tired of the flickering lights, the broken faucets, the silence of that small apartment. So I packed a small bag, just the essentials, and drove out to Wisteria Lane, the quiet suburban street where Daniel had grown up. The Quigley house sat at the end, large but modest, shaded by oaks and lined with overgrown white chrysanthemums, his late wife's favorite. The place felt familiar yet distant, like revisiting a childhood memory that wasn't yours. When I arrived, Tom greeted me with a soft smile and a warmth that surprised me. He looked older than I remembered, but still strong, composed, the kind of man who had spent most of his life doing quiet things with care. He had been living alone since his wife's death, and though solitude suited him, I could see the wear behind his eyes. "I set you up in the downstairs room, used to be Daniel's," he said. "You make yourself at home. Eat when you want. The garden's yours if you feel like picking anything." The room was simple, a wooden dresser, a small desk, and a window that overlooked the backyard, where the wisteria vines twisted up a rusted trellis. His own room was down the hall, near the kitchen, 3 doors away. We each had our own space, carefully drawn. That night, I realized I'd only packed one nightgown, a thin cotton slip. Barely enough for the chilly suburban nights. I'd rushed the packing, forgotten how different the nights were outside the city. I huddled beneath the covers, trying to sleep, but unease crept in. Outside, the old fan creaked softly. A breeze wafted through the window, laced with the earthy scent of chrysanthemums. I could hear Tom's footsteps on the porch, the sound of the screen door closing, the scrape of a wooden chair being moved. Every sound felt louder in that stillness, like it was touching some dormant nerve. I thought of Daniel, of how quickly we'd been married, how little time we'd spent together before his departure. It had been less than 3 months, hardly enough to call it a marriage. Sometimes I felt like a stranger orbiting someone else's life. And I wondered, lying there under an unfamiliar ceiling, what it really meant to wait for someone. That night, I felt, for the first time, the depth of Tom's loneliness. A man who had lived gently all his life, and who had quietly watched the years slip away after his wife died. He wasn't just my father-in-law anymore. He was a man alone in a house that had become too large. And I was a woman who had run out of places to belong. I turned over in bed and reached for my phone. Through the window, I could see his shadow cast against the sheer curtain, thin, tall, unmoving. My heart ached with something I couldn't name. Just a few weeks, I told myself, that's all this is. But even then, deep down, I sensed it. Something had shifted. The first few days living with Tom, I was careful, deliberate with every gesture, overly polite in the way newly acquainted house guests tend to be. He was no different, always respectful, always giving me space, never once making me feel like I was intruding. Each morning, Tom woke early to water the plants. I'd find a kettle of hot tea waiting on the counter when I emerged, its steam curling in the soft morning light that filtered through the lace curtains. He never said much, just a quiet nod and a warm good morning. Sarah, I began to settle into the stillness of the place. I'd sit on the porch with my tea, letting the golden sun fall through the trees. Some mornings, I'd catch Tom in the backyard, carefully pruning a bush or wiping dust from the garden benches. There was something almost sacred about the way he moved, slow, purposeful, like tending the garden helped him hold grief at bay. In the afternoons, when the heat swelled and the cicadas sang their chorus, I would cook, nothing fancy, just simple, warm meals. I never asked what Tom liked. He never complained. We'd eat together at the kitchen table, the television murmuring in the background, conversation light and sparse. But even in that silence, I noticed things, like the way he'd glance at me from behind his glasses when he thought I wasn't looking, or how he'd gently push the better portion of the roast toward my plate without saying a word. Small things, quiet things, but I saw them, and I began to hear everything. The creak of floorboards as he walked past my room at night. The soft sighs he let out when he thought no one was listening. The faint sound of his chair dragging across the floor as he sat alone in the den. One afternoon, rain began to fall, the steady, whispering kind that made the whole house seem to exhale. I rushed out to bring in the laundry I'd hung earlier. My nightdress clung wet and cold against my body, plastered to my skin. As I stepped inside, shivering, Tom appeared at the door. "You're soaked, Sarah. You'll catch a cold," he said. He held out a towel, his voice soft with concern. When he draped it across my shoulders, his hand accidentally brushed against my back, barely a touch. But it startled me. Our eyes met. His gaze wasn't long, not intense, but something in it flickered, like a match struck but not lit. "Thank you," I murmured, clutching the towel closer, as if it might still the trembling I suddenly felt inside. That night, it rained harder, the wind rattled the old windows, and the house moaned in its joints. I lay in bed, my body curled tight beneath the covers, my heart loud in my chest. Every sound seemed to rise above the quiet, the ticking clock. The rustle of leaves, the shift of Tom's footsteps in the hallway. I didn't sleep much. Instead, I thought of Daniel, my husband, now so far away, reduced to late-night texts and rare calls about nothing. I tried to remember his voice, his laugh, the way his hand felt when he held mine. But those memories were fading, thin as mist. We were barely married, and yet I already felt like a widow in every way but name. And then there was Tom, steady, kind, present. It was wrong to feel comfort in his nearness. But in that house, that loneliness we both shared grew thick. Like fog in the orchard behind the house, I started to wonder, how long could two people carry silence before it broke? There was a night when the power went out again, just after dinner. We lit candles and sat on the porch, each with a mug of tea, the glow casting dancing shadows across the railing. Neither of us spoke. The rain fell gently beyond the porch, a steady rhythm against the earth. I sat back, letting the darkness cradle us. Our shoulders were nearly touching. Nearly. The heat from his arm bled through the space between us. I don't know if it was the stillness, the storm, or something much older than either, but I let myself lean back just slightly. My shoulder brushed his. He didn't move away. My breath caught. We sat like that for minutes, unmoving, each pretending we hadn't noticed. But I had, and I knew he had, too. That night, I lay awake again. The house was quiet, but something inside me buzzed, an ache, maybe, or a longing I didn't want to name. Through the walls, I could hear the faint turn of Tom's bed frame, the occasional cough. I imagined him lying there, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the same silence. The next morning, I woke early. Tom was already outside in the garden, trimming the hedges. His white shirt was damp with dew and sweat. I watched from the window, sipping my tea. He looked up once, caught my gaze, then quickly looked away. Neither of us said anything. But something had changed, something quiet, something irreversible. The summer settled in heavy, thick with heat and unspoken things. Our routines held steady. Tom tended the garden. I cooked and cleaned, and in the hours between, we pretended life was ordinary. But it wasn't, not anymore. The stillness between us had changed. It wasn't just silence now, it was charged. It buzzed beneath our skin like static before a storm. One afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled through, sudden and fierce. I was out in the backyard, pulling down clothes from the line. My sundress clung to me as the wind whipped through the trees. The first drops had just begun when I heard Tom call out, "Sarah, come in, you'll get soaked." I ran through the sliding door, dripping and breathless. Tom stood in the kitchen, holding a towel. I reached for it, and our hands touched, just briefly. But it was enough to leave a warmth lingering on my skin long after I dried off. He averted his eyes quickly. I did the same, but we both felt it. That touch, that pause, that night, the house creaked with the kind of intimacy that had nothing to do with words. I lay awake, blanket to my chin, the storm tapping its long fingers against the window. I could hear Tom's slow steps in the hallway, then the faint closing of his door. Still, I didn't sleep. I thought about Daniel, still away, still texting, but with less regularity. I thought about how we hadn't spoken on the phone in over a week. How his last message was just a tired, "Hope you're well." And I thought about Tom, his silence more comforting than any words my husband had mustered lately. The next morning, I rose early to find Tom already sitting outside with his coffee, the paper folded neatly beside him. I sat opposite him with my tea, the air thick with the smell of wet grass and morning jasmine. He said nothing, just passed me the sugar bowl. Our fingers brushed again. I didn't pull away this time. "Sleep okay?" he asked without looking up. "Not really," I replied, stirring slowly. A long pause. Then he nodded. "Yeah, me neither." We didn't need to say why. After that, the glances became more frequent, lingering, heavy with things neither of us wanted to name. In the kitchen, while we prepped lunch, in the garden, when I handed him a pair of shears, even while watching TV in the evenings, our knees nearly touching, our eyes occasionally meeting when the screen flickered dark between scenes. Sometimes I wondered if I was imagining it, if I was projecting my loneliness onto this man. But then he would look at me, really look, and I'd feel my breath hitch. One afternoon, I leaned forward to grab a dishcloth and brushed his arm by accident. He froze, I froze. Then he quietly excused himself and left the room. I sat there for a long time, hands trembling, unsure of who I was anymore. There were small collisions after that, hands reaching for the same knife, shoulders bumping in the narrow hallway, an elbow grazing my waist in the pantry. Always accidental, always too long. Once, I dozed off on the sofa during a late afternoon heat wave. The window was open, a breeze rustling the curtains. I woke to find Tom sitting across the room, reading the paper. He looked up when he heard me stir. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said. I sat up, flushed, and pulled the blanket over my legs. His eyes lingered a second too long. I tried to tell myself this wasn't real, that we were just two people passing time under strange circumstances. But every day, it became harder to deny. My senses grew sharper around him, his scent, the soft scrape of his boots on the floor, the sound of his breath in the hallway at night. All of it etched itself deeper into me. I started to notice how he looked at me when I wore dresses, when I laughed, when I stretched across the table to reach for salt. His gaze was never lewd, just hungry, quietly desperate, like a man remembering what it was like to be wanted, and trying not to want it again. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. At night, I'd lie awake and listen for his footsteps. Some nights, I'd hear them, slow, measured, then fading down the hall. Once, they stopped right outside my door. I didn't move, I didn't breathe, but he didn't knock. The steps retreated. A week later, I came down with a low fever, nothing serious. Probably from staying out in the garden too long. I curled up in bed, too weak to cook or even shower. Tom knocked softly, asked if I needed anything. I murmured something unintelligible. Later, I woke to the smell of chicken soup. He brought it in carefully, setting it on the nightstand. "Eat a little," he said gently, "just a few bites." I let him feed me, small spoonfuls. His hand steady, but his eyes said too much. When the bowl was nearly empty, I reached out, caught his hand. His fingers stiffened at first. Then, slowly, he curled them around mine. It was brief, but in that moment, we both knew this was no longer a coincidence. This was a tide neither of us could keep pretending to resist. After the fever broke, something between us did, too. We still did our chores, me in the kitchen, Tom in the garden, but the way we moved around each other became more careful, more deliberate, like dancers navigating a stage we hadn't rehearsed for. Every morning, I watched him through the kitchen window, his sleeves rolled up, hands deep in the soil. I'd bring him a glass of water, and our hands would brush. Neither of us pulled away as quickly as before. One morning, the sun fell across his shoulders just right, lighting up the fine silver in his hair. The curve of his jaw, the crease in his neck where sweat had begun to gather. I handed him the glass, and our fingers met. His hand was dry and warm, mine cold from the glass. He didn't let go right away. "Thank you," he said, holding my gaze. "You're welcome," I whispered, unable to look away. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I was no longer fighting the thoughts. I let them come. I imagined his hand at the small of my back, his breath close, the smell of the garden still clinging to his skin. And worse, I wanted it. I wanted all of it. That terrified me, but it also made me feel alive. There was a night when the power went out again. We had grown used to it by then, almost expected it. I lit candles and brought out 2 cups of tea. We sat on the porch, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. We didn't speak for a long time. Then he asked, "Daniel still calling you?" I paused, heart stuttering. "Not really, just texts now and then. He says he's busy. Time zones are hard." Tom nodded slowly, eyes watching the dark horizon. "Sometimes," he said after a long while, "loneliness feels heavier than silence." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing, just let the words hang there like mist. That evening, the gap between us on the porch was smaller, barely an inch. When I shifted in my seat, my knee touched his. He didn't move, neither did I. A breeze passed through. The trees whispered. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. But inside me, everything was very still. The next morning, I got up early, poured tea, and wandered out to the backyard. Tom was already there, fixing a section of the fence that had come loose in the storm. I watched him hammer a nail, his shirt clinging to his back. "Need help?" I asked. "I'm almost done," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. I brought him a towel. As I held it out, he reached for it, and once again, our hands touched, except this time, neither of us moved. He looked at me, really looked, and something flickered in his eyes. Grief, confusion, desire, guilt, all rolled into one, and I didn't look away. "I should," he started, but the words trailed off. I turned quickly, pretending not to hear, but I did. I heard it all. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair. I had put on one of Daniel's old shirts, oversized and faded. Something I normally wore when I missed him. But tonight, it felt different, not nostalgic, Something else, something bolder, wrong, maybe, but honest. When I walked past Tom in the hallway, he paused mid-step. His eyes scanned me, then darted away, jaw tight. "It's supposed to be cold tonight," he said hoarsely. "Might want to shut your windows." "Thanks," I replied, voice small. But as he turned away, I caught him looking again. The days blurred together, filled with tension so thick it clung to the walls like the summer heat. Tom began lingering in doorways longer, stepping into rooms with more hesitation. And God help me, I began to wait for it. I started wearing lighter fabrics, letting my robe slip lower, sitting a little closer at dinner, testing boundaries I didn't fully understand. One night, I woke up to the sound of the front door creaking. I padded softly down the hallway, finding him sitting on the porch, alone in the dark. "You okay?" I asked from behind. He didn't turn, just couldn't sleep. I stepped outside, stood next to him. The air was warm, heavy with honeysuckle. "Me neither," I said. We sat together in silence. Then, after a long pause, he said something I didn't expect. "You remind me of her, Mary." I didn't answer, but I reached for his hand, gently, and this time, he didn't let go. The days that followed felt like walking a wire, balanced between desire and denial, each step more unstable than the last. We said very little, but our bodies had learned a new language, a hand brushing past a shoulder, a shared glance across the table that lingered too long. I caught myself holding my breath when he passed behind me. He stopped apologizing for these near touches. I stopped pretending they weren't deliberate. One evening, I sat reading by the living room window. The radio hummed softly in the distance. I wore a thin sweater. Nothing underneath. The breeze from the window fluttered the pages of my book. But I wasn't really reading. I was waiting. I heard Tom's footsteps long before he entered. He paused in the hallway, then slowly stepped in. He didn't say anything. He just stood near the bookshelf, pretending to look at titles I knew he'd never read. "It's getting cooler," he said, finally. "A little," I replied, eyes still on the book. He turned. Our eyes met. It wasn't a look of lust. It was longing, the kind that builds up over years of quiet mornings and empty dinner tables. A yearning that had nothing to do with impulse and everything to do with ache. I closed the book, setting it on the coffee table. "I should check the windows," I said. "Stand 'em up." As I passed him, our shoulders brushed. Again. Too long. Again. Neither of us moved. When I reached the window, I heard him behind me. Close. Closer than before. I turned to face him, and there he was, inches away, breathing slower than usual. He didn't touch me. He didn't speak. But his eyes were louder than anything I'd ever heard. That night, a storm rolled in, not the kind that shouts its arrival, but one that simmers, thunder without rain, heat without wind. I lay in bed, sheets clinging to my skin. I could hear him pacing in the hallway, back and forth, slower. Then silence, a soft knock. "Sarah?" His voice was low, tired, uncertain. "I'm awake," I said. He opened the door just a crack, holding a folded blanket. "Thought you might need this. It's chilly tonight." I nodded, reaching for it. Our fingers brushed again, because of course they did. He lingered in the doorway, I should go, he said. Okay, I answered. But he didn't move. I looked up at him. Really looked. His hands trembled slightly at his sides. His mouth parted like he might speak. But no words came, just a step forward. Then another. By the time he reached the edge of my bed, I was already holding my breath. He sat down gently, like someone easing into water that might drown him. He didn't touch me, not at first, but he was close enough to feel my breath. And then he reached out, slowly, and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. It was nothing, and everything. I don't know what this is, he whispered. Me neither. I breathed, and we sat there, neither pulling away, both of us caught in something too quiet to name and too loud to ignore. The next day, we avoided each other, barely spoke. Every footstep echoed in that house like a warning bell. I burned the toast. He overwatered the ferns. We fumbled our way through the hours, pretending it hadn't happened, pretending we weren't changed. But by evening, the air between us had thickened again, a storm still waiting to break. That night, I passed him in the hallway. He paused. I paused. Neither of us moved. Finally, I whispered, "Tom." He stepped closer, but stopped just shy of touching me. "I shouldn't," he said. "I know, but I want to. I know." And I stood there, heart pounding, the hallway dim around us, wondering how something could feel so inevitable and so wrong. That evening, a blackout swept through the neighborhood again. The lights blinked once, twice, then everything went dark. I stood in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator gone, the air suddenly heavier. Outside, the sky had turned a strange orange-gray, a storm gathering its voice just beyond the hills. Tom lit 2 candles and set them on the living room table. "I've got matches in the drawer if we need more," he said. I nodded, placing 2 mugs of lukewarm tea beside them. We sat on opposite ends of the sofa, the small flames casting flickering shadows that danced across the ceiling. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was charged, like the house had grown ears, like the air was listening. Rain started to fall softly, tapping at the roof like a question it was afraid to ask. I pulled my knees up under me, staring at the orange glow between us. "I used to be afraid of the dark as a kid," I said, voice barely above a whisper. I hated the sound of the wind through the trees, thought something was coming for me. Tom smiled faintly. "I still sleep with a nightlight," he admitted, "ever since Mary passed. Can't stand the silence. That truth, quiet, bare, human, hung between us." I shifted slightly. Our knees brushed. Neither of us pulled away. He turned toward me slowly, his hand resting on the cushion beside my leg, not touching, just near enough that my skin noticed. "I keep trying not to feel this," he said. "Me too." Outside, thunder grumbled, the house creaked, and then he reached for my hand. This time, I didn't hesitate. I laced my fingers through his, the feel of his rough knuckles warm against my palm. "This isn't right," I whispered. "But it's real," he said, and he was right. Whatever this was, whatever name it did or didn't deserve, it was real. It had crept in between the lonely mornings and the thunderous silences. It had taken root in the hours no one saw, in the glances no one else noticed. The wind picked up outside. A window rattled somewhere down the hall. We didn't move. He turned to me. Our eyes locked. We didn't kiss, not then, but we came close enough to know it was inevitable. Later that night, I lay in bed, the blanket pulled up to my chest, my fingers still tingling from the memory of his touch. Through the thin wall between our rooms, I could hear the creak of his bed frame as he shifted, the occasional sigh, the quiet war happening inside us both. I didn't sleep much, neither did he. I knew because once, in the thick of the night, I heard the soft creak of the hallway floor. Then, nothing, just a stillness thick with things unsaid. The next morning, I woke early. Tom was already outside. As usual, I watched him from the kitchen window. His figure bent over a patch of wild wisteria, pruning shears in hand. There was something different about him that morning, more careful, more quiet, like he was afraid even the garden might betray him. I made breakfast, eggs, toast, fresh fruit, set 2 plates. He came in, shirt damp with sweat, and washed his hands at the sink. We sat down across from each other. We ate slowly, said almost nothing, but every glance we exchanged, every silence between bites, said exactly what we didn't dare to say out loud, that the line had already been crossed, that there was no turning back. After that night, something in the house shifted, subtle, but undeniable. Our footsteps became softer, our voices quieter. Every move we made around each other felt calculated, even when we tried to act normal. Tom no longer lingered at the breakfast table. I no longer stood too long at the window watching him in the garden. But our restraint was flimsy, and we both knew it. A curtain pulled tight over a window already cracked open. I started to avoid mirrors. I couldn't look at myself without remembering the way his hand had felt against mine, the way his eyes lingered. I felt too much and not enough all at once, ashamed. Alive, uncertain. One afternoon, I caught him watching me through the screen door. I had been wiping down the table, my sleeves rolled up, my collar slightly open from the heat. When I turned, his eyes met mine, and for the first time, he didn't look away. He held my gaze, and then he walked away without a word. That silence said everything. Daniel called that evening. His voice came through the speaker, distant and tinny. "Hey, baby, just wanted to check in. How's the house? Dad doing okay?" "Everything's fine," I said, forcing a smile he couldn't see. "Same as usual. You sound tired," he said. "Just a long day." We made small talk. He asked about the plumbing back in the city. I gave vague answers. I told him the apartment renovations were nearly done. He said he might extend his stay a little longer if the project required it. "I miss you," he said. I stared out the window, watching Tom water the flowers. "I miss you too." After the call ended, I sat there for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just listened to the buzz of the insects outside, to the quiet knock of the sprinkler heads tapping against the siding, to the guilt curling itself tight inside my chest like a sleeping cat. That night, sleep didn't come. I tossed and turned, blankets twisted around my legs. I thought about my husband's voice, about Tom's silence, about the air between us, heavy, thick with everything we'd refused to name. And then I heard it. Soft footsteps outside my room. They paused. A knock, so light I might have imagined it. I sat up. "Tom?" Silence. Then, "Can I come in?" My throat tightened. "Yes." He opened the door halfway, the hallway light painting shadows across his face. He looked older than usual, worn, but his eyes still held that quiet fire. In his hand was a folded jacket. "Thought you might be cold," he said. I nodded. He stepped forward, placed the jacket on the foot of the bed. We stood there, me in the soft glow of the table lamp. Him in the doorway. Neither of us moved. Then he spoke, voice barely above a breath. "I don't know how to stop wanting this." My heart pounded. "Me neither," I said. "This isn't who I am." He whispered. "I know," I replied. He stepped back. "Good night, Sarah. Good night." And just like that, he was gone. But the space he left behind in the room was louder than any door slamming shut. The next day, the weather broke. Dark clouds piled like ash over the horizon. And by afternoon, the sky opened up. Rain fell in sheets, pounding the roof, rattling the porch, hammering the old window panes with relentless rhythm. I stayed in my room most of the day, pretending to clean, trying to avoid thinking, failing at both. The memory of Tom's voice the night before, "I don't know how to stop wanting this," echoed in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. Outside, the garden drowned in water. The wind bent the wisteria vines low. Inside, the house felt sealed shut by more than the storm. By nightfall, the electricity cut out again. I lit 2 candles, sat by the edge of my bed, listened to the rain and to my own heart. Then, like every story that wants to write itself, there came a knock at the door. Soft, hesitant, I opened it. Tom stood there, damp at the collar, holding a flashlight and a folded wool sweater. "You okay?" he asked. "Cold," I answered. He handed me the sweater. Our fingers touched. Neither of us pulled back. "I shouldn't be here," he said, voice rough. "I know, but I couldn't stay in that room." I stepped aside. He entered. We sat on the edge of the bed in silence. The candlelight made the walls look like they were breathing. Outside, thunder rolled low like a warning. I looked at him. He looked at me. There were no more words. He leaned in first, cautious, slow. His hand grazed my cheek. I didn't flinch. My skin welcomed him like it had been waiting. My breath caught when his forehead touched mine. Then finally, after all the near misses, all the almosts, he kissed me, not hurried, not hungry, but with the reverence of someone touching a wound they knew they could never heal. His hands were warm and steady, sliding over my back, guiding me toward him. My body responded before my mind could catch up. All the months of waiting, all the silences, all the aching glances, we let them go in that one long moment. There was no ceremony to it, no speeches or guilt-laced apologies. Just 2 people, fragile and full of longing, folding into each other in the dark. Later, we lay in the quiet. The storm had softened. The room smelled of rain, of sweat, of regret. His arm was draped loosely across my waist. My head rested against his chest. Neither of us spoke. Eventually, he whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because I wasn't sorry. Not yet. What I felt was sorrow, and closeness, and the warmth of something that was already breaking. The next morning, The power returned. The rain stopped. But something between us had been permanently undone. Tom left my room before sunrise. He folded the sweater I'd worn and set it quietly on the chair by the door. When I finally walked into the kitchen, he was already there, hair combed, shirt tucked, face unreadable. We didn't speak of the night. We didn't speak of anything. We ate breakfast like strangers sharing a meal at an airport, careful not to look too long, careful not to say too much. But every sound, the clink of the spoon, the scrape of the chair, the hum of the refrigerator, was a reminder of what we had done and what we could never undo. In the days that followed, we lived inside a new kind of quiet, one shaped by restraint and laced with unbearable awareness. Tom no longer lingered near the kitchen while I cooked. I no longer brought him his morning tea on the porch. We moved through the house like two magnets, aware of each other's pull but deliberately keeping space in between. It wasn't avoidance. It was self-preservation. The air was heavy with everything we didn't say. I tried to lose myself in chores, sweeping the hallway 3 times a day, organizing cabinets, wiping already clean counters. I couldn't look at the sofa without seeing his silhouette. I couldn't lie in bed without remembering the warmth of his body. The sound of rain, the breath caught between his ribs when I touched his chest. At night, I listened for his footsteps. Sometimes they came, sometimes they didn't. When they stopped outside my door, I held my breath. When they didn't come at all, I couldn't sleep. One afternoon, I was folding laundry when Daniel called again. His voice was lighter this time, distracted, full of updates I didn't ask for. Things are going well here. Might get extended another 2 months. You okay? Yeah, everything's good, I said, staring out at the garden, where Tom knelt beside the chrysanthemums. You've been quiet lately, just tired. A pause. I miss you. I wanted to say it back. I wanted to mean it. But the words sat on my tongue like stones. Me too, I said eventually. That night, I sat on the porch alone. The power was on, the house was lit, but I still lit a candle. I needed the darkness. Tom joined me eventually. He didn't sit close, didn't say anything, just lowered himself into the chair beside mine, exhaling as he looked out at the night. We sat that way for a long time. The candle flickered between us. The breeze stirred the vines. Then he said, quietly, without looking at me, I think about that night too much. I didn't answer. I couldn't. It wasn't supposed to happen. He continued, but I don't regret it. That's what makes it worse. Still, I said nothing, but my fingers curled tight in my lap. I don't expect forgiveness, Sarah, he said, finally looking at me. Not from you, not from myself. There's nothing to forgive, I said, my voice barely there. There's everything to forgive, he replied. The next morning, I found a small note on the kitchen counter, scrolled in hurried handwriting. Gone to the hardware store. Be back before lunch. It was ordinary. It broke me, because I couldn't bear how ordinary everything had become again. As if that night had never happened. As if we hadn't both crossed a line we could never uncross. Later that day, I stood in the backyard, staring at the flowers. The garden had always felt like a place of quiet. Now it felt like confession. I bent down to touch a wilted blossom. The petals crumbled in my hand. Behind me, I heard Tom's voice. They always die right after they bloom. I turned. He was standing in the doorway, sunlight hitting the side of his face. He looked like a memory, a beautiful one, a painful one. I need to go back to the city soon, I said. He nodded slowly. I know. The apartment's almost ready. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. If that's what you need, he finally said. It is. I lied. I began packing the next day, not because I had a plan, not because the city called me back, but because staying any longer would mean something would break. Either inside the house or inside me. The suitcase felt too loud as I unzipped it. Folding clothes into neat stacks became an act of distraction. Every item I packed seemed to echo with memory. The cardigan I wore the first night it rained. The nightgown I hadn't touched since that night. The faded t-shirt I had borrowed once and never returned. As I folded it, I paused. It still smelled faintly of Tom's detergent, something herbal and clean, with a hint of worn cotton. I held it to my chest for a moment, just long enough to let it ache, then placed it at the bottom of the suitcase. From the hallway, I heard him knock, just once. Can I come in? Yes. He stepped inside, stopped at the doorway. You don't have to go. I do. He didn't argue, just looked at me the way someone looks at a person about to walk off the edge of something, helpless. Resigned. If you stay, he said, we'll lose the last bit of sense we have. And if I go, we lose each other. His voice cracked just slightly. Maybe we already have. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. There was only the thick pause before he left the room and the soft sound of his footsteps retreating down the hall. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the window, watching the moonlight paint shadows across the porch. The garden glistened from a fresh shower. Somewhere beyond the trees, a train groaned in the distance. And inside the house, nothing moved. Morning came with pale sunlight and the scent of coffee I didn't brew. I dressed in silence. When I stepped into the kitchen, he was there, freshly shaven, collared shirt, hands wrapped around a mug. We didn't say much, just exchanged a few words about the weather, the roads, the weight of my bag. I'll carry it to the car for you, he said. I nodded. At the front door, I turned to look at him one last time. He stood still, his eyes on the floor. One hand braced against the door frame like he was trying to hold the house up with his shoulders. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. Nothing would be enough. Not apology, not explanation, not goodbye. So instead, I touched his hand. Just for a moment. He didn't pull away. As I drove down Wisteria Lane, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, but the weight of it grew larger in my chest. I didn't cry until I reached the freeway. Even then, the tears were quiet, just enough to blur the road, just enough to tell me this wasn't over, not really. Back in the city, everything felt off, like furniture slightly rearranged in a familiar room. My apartment smelled of paint and new wood, but it didn't feel like home. The walls were clean, the bed was made, but I kept catching myself listening for sounds that didn't belong here. The buzz of the garden sprinkler, the soft groan of the porch swing, the clink of Tom's coffee mug on ceramic tile. The city moved too fast. My body didn't. It was like I'd come back wearing someone else's skin. I didn't unpack right away. I left the suitcase half open on the floor. The cardigan lay across the couch, untouched. The t-shirt stayed at the bottom of the bag. I couldn't bring myself to wash it. I went through the motions: grocery store, work emails, brief calls with Daniel. He sent photos from abroad, smiling in front of project sites. Casual texts full of professional updates. Can't wait to be home. I stared at the screen. I didn't reply. When I did answer later that evening, I said, "Me too." It was a lie that sounded like a wish. Nights were the hardest. I'd sit by the window with a mug of chamomile, watching the lights flicker from neighboring buildings. I kept the radio on low, a hum in the background. But my thoughts always drifted elsewhere, back to the porch. The candlelight, the soft knock at my door. I didn't reach out to Tom, and he didn't call. But some nights, I would lie in bed, convinced I heard his voice in the breeze, whispering the kind of apology you don't say aloud, one laced with memory. Not regret. A week passed. Then, too, I threw myself into work. I woke up early, dressed well, arrived first at the office. I joined meetings, returned emails, smiled when spoken to. Everyone said I seemed better. No one knew I was unraveling. At lunch, I'd scroll through photos on my phone and stop at a picture I had taken one quiet morning. Tom in the garden, crouched beside the sun warming his shoulder. I didn't delete it. I couldn't. One evening, as the sky turned silver behind the glass, I found myself holding a piece of stationery I hadn't touched in years. Without thinking, I began to write. "Tom, I don't know what to say that would make any of it easier. Or less wrong. Maybe this letter doesn't make sense. But I need you to know, it wasn't just loneliness. It was something else, something real. And no matter how hard I try, I can't forget it. I don't want to. Please take care of the garden. And yourself. S." I folded it, then left it on my desk for days. I never mailed it. Days folded into weeks. I moved through the apartment like a ghost, tidying shelves I didn't care about, cooking meals I didn't taste, replying to messages with rehearsed enthusiasm. On the outside, I was functioning. On the inside, I was holding my breath. I stopped reaching for my phone every time it buzzed. Stopped waiting for messages from Tom that I knew would never come. But the ache didn't fade. It simply changed shape. One Sunday afternoon, the rain returned. The city dimmed under a gray sky, and the sound of water tapping against the windows pulled something loose inside me. I stood at the glass, eyes tracing the drops as they slid down in crooked paths. And then, without warning, I wept. I hadn't cried since leaving Wisteria Lane, not truly. But now the tears came all at once, quiet but relentless, spilling down my cheeks without sound. I slid down to the floor, hands shaking, the silence of the apartment pressing in from all sides. I missed him, not just the way he looked at me, not the night we crossed the line, but the thousand small kindnesses, the way he left a towel folded near the bathroom, the cup of tea warming on the counter, the simple fact of not being alone in the morning. When the tears stopped, I wiped my face with my sleeve and looked at the letter again. It had been sitting untouched on the corner of my desk for almost 2 weeks. I unfolded it, reread it, every line still true, every word still mine. I stood, reached for my bag, slid the letter inside. I walked 2 blocks to the mailbox and stood there, heart hammering. Then I turned around and went home. I didn't send it, not because I didn't mean it, but because I did. Because some things, once spoken, can't be unsaid. Because some memories only remain beautiful if they stay silent. That night, Daniel called again. He said he might be back within a month. He said he was tired of hotel rooms. He asked if I'd made the place feel like home again. I said I was trying. He told me he missed my voice. I told him I missed it too. Then I hung up and sat in the dark with the lights off. Daniel came home on a warm afternoon in early fall. I met him at the airport. I smiled the way I was supposed to. I let him pull me in, let his kiss brush my cheek. He looked thinner, a little older, but his eyes still had that boyish charm, the one that had once made me believe in something permanent. On the drive home, he told me stories about the project, about the team, about the street food he swore I would have hated. I laughed at the right moments, asked the right questions, but the whole time, I kept seeing a porch bathed in candlelight and a man pruning chrysanthemums with careful, lonely hands. Back in the apartment, he marveled at how new everything looked, touched the countertops, walked barefoot across the new floors. "You did a great job, babe," he said. "Thanks," I whispered. For a while, we tried to be normal. We went out to dinner, visited friends, sat side by side on the couch watching old shows, our shoulders brushing, but it didn't feel like touch. It felt like rehearsal. At night, we lay in the same bed, but I always turned away first. He didn't ask why. One morning, about a month after his return, Daniel brought up his father. He hasn't really said much since I got back. He said, pouring coffee, "I think he's lonelier than he admits." My chest tightened. "You should call him," I said. "You spent time with him. Did he seem okay?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "He was kind, quiet. He missed you." Daniel smiled, sipping his coffee, not noticing the way my hand trembled slightly as I lifted my mug. I never spoke to Tom again. No messages, no letters, no accidental calls. The silence between us became its own kind of reverence, one made of restraint, not denial. Sometimes I wondered if he still kept my sweater folded in the linen cabinet, if he still watered the chrysanthemums, if he stood on the porch alone at night, waiting for a breeze that never came. I would never know, and maybe that was the point. Some stories don't have endings, just echoes. Years passed. The apartment changed again, new furniture, different curtains, photos framed and placed neatly on shelves. Daniel and I learned how to exist in parallel. We laughed at parties, whispered across dinner tables, touched hands in elevators, but it never felt like before. Something had shifted, quietly, permanently, and though he never said anything, I often caught Daniel watching me when I stared too long out the window, as if he sensed I'd left part of myself somewhere I couldn't explain. Maybe he did, maybe he always knew. I never returned to Wisteria Lane, but sometimes I'd dream of it, of the garden in bloom, of the porch glowing gold under candlelight, of a man who once touched my face like it was the last thing he'd ever be allowed to love. In the dream, the house never changes, the screen door still squeaks, the wisteria still climbs, and Tom is always there, just out of reach, standing in the rain with a towel in his hand and something sorrowful in his eyes. When I wake, the ache lingers longer than the memory. One spring, I passed a flower vendor on my way to work. Among the daffodils and tulips were white chrysanthemums, arranged in tight, fragile clusters. I stood there too long, frozen by a scent that pulled something loose in me. The vendor asked if I wanted to buy some. I said no, but I carried the smell of them with me the rest of the day. I never told anyone what happened. Not Daniel, not my friends, not even the pages of my journal. Some truths, once spoken, lose their shape. Some loves are not meant to be retold. They're meant to live quietly, like a garden that blooms once and never again, but whose petals still scatter in the corners of your memory. When I think of him now, I don't think of the night we crossed the line. I think of the night we didn't. The ones where we came close, too close, and chose to sit in the silence instead. The ones where everything could have happened, and somehow didn't. The restraint, the ache, the nearlies. That's where the story lives. Not in the heat of a single night, but in the long, gentle ache of what was real and couldn't stay. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Some stories don't leave us with answers, just echoes. If this one stirred something in you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know how it made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell, so you won't miss the next quiet tale waiting to be told. Until then, stay well, stay warm, and keep listening.